Well, I think it's clear that after 11 years, that Russia does not have the capability to knock Ukraine out of the war. We're going to see Germany for sure, if not Taurus, then uh, helping Ukraine develop its own systems. It's for the security and stability of Europe that Ukraine has to be successful also.
Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week is what is happening in Sumy, and is it actually going to affect the front line in Ukraine? And also some minor questions about the Trump administration and what they're doing right or wrong. And helping us answer that question today is Ben Hodges.
Ben Hodges is a military analyst and retired American officer. He was born in 1958 in the United States. He is a graduate of the United States Military Academy. In 1989, he became an instructor at the U.S. Army Infantry School. He served as the commander of the U.S. Army in Europe. He also held the position of senior battalion officer in the 101st Airborne Division. Later, he became an aide-de-camp to the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe. Currently, he heads the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis.
I'm Ben Hodges, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. I live now in Frankfurt, Germany.
And you have been a very staunch supporter of Ukraine and a very big critic of how this war has played out in terms of ally support and in terms of delays and in terms of sort of like disbelief in what Ukraine is capable of, for which we're very thankful to you, because you're one of the very big voices who does that. I'm very curious as to your opinion on what's been happening in Sumy these days. Russians have been taking some little villages and have been sort of advancing in parts of other villages. And there is a lot of talk about an offensive on Sumy to create a sort of buffer gray zone. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's clear that after 11 years, that Russia does not have the capability to knock Ukraine out of the war. They had every advantage, air, land, sea, industry, population, and yet here we are in May of 2025, and Russia still is unable to make any large significant gains, and they lack the capability to exploit even the small gains that they do make. Now, obviously, for Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting in all these different places where the Russians are launching their attacks, it's hell for them. It's very difficult. But I think from a strategic standpoint, the Russians cannot overrun or knock Ukraine out. So the West has got to keep providing capabilities that Ukraine needs, whether it's ammunition or weapons, or investing in Ukraine's ability to produce its own weapons. Um, this is a war of attrition. And so Ukraine, of course, still has to solve its manpower problems. And I believe that there are enough women and men of military age in Ukraine that could fill the ranks, but the government has got to earn the confidence of the population that Ukrainian women and men will not just be fed into the meat grinder, but they will be properly equipped and trained before they are sent to battle. I think that it's hard to understand exactly what Russia is trying to accomplish in the immediate and near term. Either they're trying to create as much space as they can in anticipation of eventually getting to negotiations, so to change the facts on the ground or create new facts on the ground. But at the end of the day, they're going to keep doing what they're doing because they don't care about their own casualties. They're going to keep doing what they do until they have achieved their strategic objective, which is the destruction of Ukraine as a state.
Yeah. They certainly are never going to stop, and they have been bringing their troops towards the Finnish border. And Finland is kind of getting a bit queasy about it, obviously and understandably. So, what do you think about the possibility of the Finnish front opening, which I guess is it's a very ironic name, provided there was already one Finnish front war, Finnish Winter War in World War II.
I think that would be a catastrophe for Russia. They've already demonstrated they cannot defeat Ukraine. And so then to open up a new front somewhere else, I mean, a catastrophe for Russia. They've already demonstrated that they cannot defeat Ukraine, and then to attack Finland, which is much better prepared than Ukraine was 3.5 years ago, would be a catastrophe for Russia. So I'm skeptical about reports that they might do this. Um, Perhaps they're wanting to test whether or not the alliance is really willing to respond to something like this. You know, the goal from Moscow has always been, even during the Cold War, was to break NATO and to drive a wedge between the US and Europe. And so perhaps they're thinking that if they attack somewhere inside Finland, that the US or other countries would not actually respond. And that would be terrible, obviously, for the alliance. Um, but I think I think there probably are some Finns that are hoping that the Russians would actually do this because they are so much better prepared, better trained, better equipped than Russian forces are, and that could change the whole strategic dynamic. I'm just skeptical that Russia has the ability to open up something new at this time.
I think they're likely just testing their boundaries and seeing how much they can do to push NATO, because that's what they have been kind of
Yeah.
doing, and NATO hasn't really been giving Russia a proper response. It's always been delayed, or it's always been kind of not enough. Speaking of that, well, the US at the head of NATO has the new administration for over 3 months now, and there has been this negotiation for peace going on, which I say negotiation, with a large rock of salt, because realistically, since Donald Trump and his administration have entered this communication, it's gotten far worse for Ukraine. There have been a lot more aerial attacks, and there have been a lot more. Russia has been feeling like they can do a lot more. What do you think this current administration is mishandling with this war, and why?
Well, the Trump administration's approach has been doomed to failure from the very beginning because they never um, understood or appreciated the geography, the culture, the history, the why this is going on. Um, the, uh, the or else they didn't care, and so when the president was that terrible day when he was yelling at President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and he said, "You got no cards." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And that confirmed for me that the White House and the administration, they don't understand why Ukrainians are fighting, what's at stake, and so uh, the whole approach has been doomed from the beginning. And then, of course, Mr. Witkoff is totally incompetent and so easily played by the Russians. Um, and the administration gave away so much leverage from the beginning. I mean, when they started by saying at the beginning, when Secretary Rubio says, "Well, Ukraine's going to have to give up some land," obviously, why? Why is that? Why is that your start point? So, I think that uh, I guess my hope all along was that the president would finally realize that he was being mocked and was getting no respect from the Kremlin, and that he would finally get so irritated that he would do something. And and yet what we see once again yesterday, he says, "Well, we'll know in about 2 weeks." What else does the Kremlin have to do to convince him? And I think he's never going to. This is never going to happen. I don't. I have
Of
zero
course.
confidence that President Trump or his administration will do anything to help Ukraine in a meaningful way until I see agreement to sell Patriot and all kinds of other things to Ukraine and implementation of real economic pressure. I mean, President Trump could wreck Russia's oil and gas infrastructure right now by helping with blocking the movement of the shadow fleet vessels and also by market manipulation to get the price down so low that it would wreck Russia. He's not willing to do that. So I have no confidence that this administration is going to do anything to help Russia.
Well, to be fair, from a political standpoint, I feel like Trump is somewhat afraid of Putin. At least that's what it sounds like, because, he went into this negotiation with ego, right? Like his latest Truth Social meltdown was, I don't understand what happened to him. We're friends, and he's bombing these cities even though we're talking. So Trump is surprised that Putin doesn't care about their relationship and doesn't care about about them talking, right? And it's obviously funny to the rest of the world, not Donald Trump. because everyone from the very beginning knew that Putin doesn't respect him, and I think he's just now realizing it. But then there is this idea of mighty Russia, and of course his dealings in Russia back in the 80s. And I'm not saying that to suggest he's a Russian asset. I'm saying that to suggest I think that he sees Russia as something much bigger than it actually is, and maybe a lot more influential. And I don't know if he knows that he can that he can actually, with the power of the United States, he could actually wreck Russia. But
Yeah. I think that it's also, because there's no record of President Trump in his life ever accepting responsibility for anything that went wrong. This is part of his saying, well, Putin's gone crazy. So it's Putin's fault, but then it's Zelensky's fault also, that his grand plan is not working out. So this is part of his MO, unfortunately.
yeah, of course, always. I think we're not going to see the day where Trump ever takes responsibility for his own actions. That's part of it. That's part of his political play, and it's part of his identity, I think, at this point. But you mentioned sales of Patriots and long-range missiles. Speaking of that, there are whispers about Taurus and Germany. Do you have anything to comment on that, given that you are in Germany?
Yeah, well, I hope that Germany does, in fact, eventually deliver Taurus and or other equivalent type capabilities. I've been encouraged by the new German Bundeskanzler, Mr. Merz. He's been a strong advocate for Ukraine from before he became Bundeskanzler. Of course, he still has to deal with internal German politics. It's a coalition government.
Yeah.
But I think that we're going to see Germany for sure, if not Taurus, then uh, helping Ukraine develop its own system. So German investment into Ukraine defense industry, which will be good. So overall, positive message from Germany. I liked it that he talked about no restrictions on anything that is provided. That's also an important step. The Russians obviously are worried about this. That's why they immediately threatened that they might have to strike Berlin. Of course, they're not going to do that, but this is the Russian way of constant empty threats, because they know that there will be some people that will be intimidated by this. So I can't say, I mean, because I don't know if when Taurus is going to be delivered. I've heard rumors that they were already there. I don't know. Um, but I think Mr. Merritt was correct to say we're not going to talk publicly about what's being delivered. I,
Yeah.
I think that's smart. Let's when things start blowing up inside Russia, then we'll know.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Yeah, I think that should have been a strategy of most governments from the very beginning, is to just have it as intelligence, not as public knowledge, to show how great they are and how much they're giving, because that gives Russia ammunition. However, Ukraine has been developing its own weapons. There are some long-range missiles that have recently been launched, and by launched I don't mean at Russia, I mean as in unveiled, and same with kind of like a prototype of a Shahed like kamikaze drone, but the problem with them is that their payloads are way smaller than those of Russians. So, it's about 10 of these long-range missiles, and 10 of these drones can cause not even as much damage as one Shahed or one long-range missile from Russia. So there is certainly a long way to go. Well, we've discussed, all of the shortcomings of Russia, all of the shortcomings of Western help. What do you think Ukraine can do better in the conditions in which we are right now in order to keep fighting and gain an upper hand?
Well, I think the Ukrainian government and the general staff and the soldiers of Ukrainian armed forces have already achieved unbelievable levels of, defeating Russia, destroying Russia's army, navy, air force, going after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. All of these things are amazing achievements given where we started 11 years ago and now 3.5 years ago. It's impressive. Um, but I think a couple of areas that still, and this is not news. I mean, I know the government's working on it, is growing what we call the institutional army. That's the part of the military that recruits, trains, equips the operational force. So that requires investment of people and money also to get the right women and men who want to come and serve and who um, have proper equipment and they're trained before they're sent to join an actual operational unit. This is an area that still requires more effort. I think the burden is on the government to earn the confidence of Ukrainian families that their son and daughter is not going to be put in an old Soviet prison army, but in a modern Ukrainian army that will give their sons and daughters the best chance to survive, but also be effective as soldiers. That's a big investment, but I think this is essential for the long term, not only the conduct of this war, but for Ukraine's security in the long term. And that would also encourage the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian women and men who are military age who are not in Ukraine to return. I mean, I see Ukrainian license plates here in Frankfurt all the time. There are Ukrainians that are in Poland, Romania, Germany, France, other European countries. They need to, um, you know, if they're military age, they need to go back home, not be grabbed and drugged back, but they need to say, I want to go back home and do my part. But the burden is on the government to encourage them to come back. The other thing, of course, is continuing to develop capabilities that have not only the range and precision, but also the payload. And you've already alluded to this. And I think this is coming. This is coming. And it will be useful if the United States and Germany and UK and other countries are investing in Ukraine's defense industry, and it feels like more and more of that is happening.
Yeah, for sure. There's only so much that we can do on our own, right? There is a lot of chatter all around the world about Ukraine's advanced tech and how we created all of these things from scratch, which we did, and we continue doing that. But it's sort of like, it's kind of like getting a cake with no filling. Yes, we're capable of developing this technology, but it's how far can we go in an environment of war in already quite limited financial circumstances, and also without the technology that would allow us to actually make these weapons very capable, right? But, we keep going. Is there anything that you would like to add for our conversation before we say goodbye today?
I think that the Europe is realizing that they cannot depend on the United States, unfortunately, and it pains me to say this, but for Europe, it's for the security and stability of Europe that Ukraine has to be successful also.
Yeah.
And so European countries recognize this, and there's an increasing sense of urgency, not only for growing and modernizing their own defensive capabilities, but also to help Ukraine. And almost every week I'll see another announcement from Sweden, for example, or Germany or France or somewhere that something is being provided to Ukraine. So that's encouraging to me. I I spend a lot of time on the road around Europe, and I don't get the sense that people are this so-called Ukraine fatigue. I don't hear it. It was about a year ago, people were starting to talk about Ukraine fatigue and that sort of. I don't hear that anymore. I hear what I hear is people are talking about we have got to do something, and I hope it happens soon enough.
That's the one thing that the Trump administration did very successfully. It turned Canada away from the far right, and it turned Europe back onto wanting to explore their own security and partner with Ukraine and really take this seriously. So I guess we can thank him for that. I have a personal question. You don't have to answer it, but it's kind of a curveball question. So a lot of people in the United States who are unsatisfied with Donald Trump, and it's a very theory question, right? It has nothing to do with Ukraine. They are afraid of protesting, and they're afraid of doing something very major because they believe that if a lot of people gather in a lot of cities and do something major, then Trump would deploy the US military. But then in the US military doctrine, the military is supposed to protect the American people. What do you think would happen in this imaginable scenario with the United States military today? Would they be on the side of the people, or would they be on the side of the government?
Well, first of all, the U.S. military is on the side of the Constitution. And we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Yes, the president's commander in chief, but the oath is not to the president, it's to the Constitution. This is very important, and we reinforce this over and over and over at every promotion ceremony, reenlistment ceremony, every other chance you can, so that soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines all are constantly reminded of their obligation to the oath of their oath to the Constitution. So it's against the law for American soldiers to be used against American people. Um, we have police forces, you have other domestic security forces. The military cannot be used against the American people unless there is a certain, very specific set of circumstances. This was the conflict between General Milley and President Trump in the first Trump administration, where Trump wanted the military to come out and quell the protests back during the time of Black Lives Matter. And General Milley had the courage to say, no, sir, that's illegal. Soldiers are, you cannot use American soldiers for that. Now, I I hope that our military leaders continue to have the moral courage to say no to that. Unfortunately, we have a Secretary of Defense who has zero moral courage and who is a total yes man, and that's why he's in position. And they got rid of a lot of senior generals and admirals to help send the signal that you don't say no to the president. But most of the people that are senior officers today are people that I know have known for a long time. These are good quality officers, and I have confidence that they will continue to fulfill their oath. That doesn't mean that they won't have to do some things that are distasteful, but there's a difference between not liking a policy and something being illegal and or unlawful. And I hope that they'll be able to continue to differentiate that.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. I think it's going to be very productive and very necessary for a lot of people because within the age of the conspiracy theories and, fake news, I love that word. I think a lot of people are very scared, and it's very good to hear it from the experts. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I really sure hope we can have another one sometime soon. And thank you for joining our channel.
Okay, thanks for the privilege.
Thank you so much. Well, I really hope that this conversation was as productive for you as it was for me. It was certainly very interesting, and it's always helpful to hear from people like Ben Hodges. If you would like to hear more conversations like that in the future, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, and also, of course, give this video a like, send it to a friend, and leave all of your questions, suggestions, and thoughts in the comments down below, because I read all of them and I really like having communication with you guys. And if you'd like to learn more things about Ukraine that are not so newsy and a lot more relaxed, do check out my personal podcast, Unmasking Pod, on YouTube and all other streaming platforms. See you next time.